My name is Emma. I'm 28 years old. A few nights ago, my own mother planted her palms on my desk and physically pushed it away from the wall so my brother could set up his camera. There was no shouting. No discussion. She spoke like the decision had already been finalized. The room was his now for a studio, and I could move my work downstairs to the basement. My brother stood in the doorway with his arms crossed, watching my screens shut off one by one like he was enjoying a performance. He smirked and said I'd be fine down there, that fewer distractions might even help. He tried to make it sound light, but every word landed exactly as he intended. That room was my office. I had built it slowly, piece by piece, so I could work remotely as a designer and actually keep up with the bills that kept that house functioning. I looked at him, then at her, and all I said was, okay. No argument. No drama. I picked up my laptop, my hard drive, and whatever I could carry in one trip. I walked straight past them and down the stairs, just like they expected. What they didn't realize was that when I said, okay, I wasn't agreeing. I was finished. That same night, I left without making noise. I didn't just change the location of my desk. I changed everything. By the next morning, the phone started ringing. Then the messages followed. They said they couldn't manage without me. They begged me to answer. Suddenly, I was the only one who knew how to stop their lives from unraveling. If you've ever wondered what happens when the person everyone relies on finally steps away, stay with me, because the way they pleaded for me to return forced me to rethink how much I ever allowed myself to be used. Growing up, I always sensed something was off in my family, but I didn't understand how uneven it really was until money entered the picture. I was the kid who stayed up late finishing assignments, organizing notes, and caring about results. My younger brother, Ethan, was labeled sensitive and artistic, which somehow meant expectations bent around him. When I earned a scholarship into a solid design program, my mom, Lynn, gave me a quick hug and told me I had always been the responsible one. When Ethan barely passed an online course he rarely worked on, she ordered a custom cake and posted about it online like it was a historic achievement. I learned early that my successes didn't come with celebration. After graduation, with rent in Manhattan pushing $3,000 for almost nothing, moving back to our Brooklyn home felt like the only logical option. I told myself it would be short-term, just long enough to save from my UX job and freelance projects. Instead, I slowly became the household's emergency fund, tech fixer, and solution for every problem, and no one acknowledged the shift except me. At first, it seemed harmless. One month my mom came up short, so I covered the electric bill. Then the internet plan got upgraded so Ethan could stream without interruptions, and somehow the charge landed on my card. Netflix, Spotify, the shared phone plan, extra groceries for takeout nights we called family bonding, all of it quietly became my responsibility. I kept telling myself it was fine. I earned more. This was what loving people looked like. But every time another subscription renewed automatically, one they wouldn't last a week without, that tight feeling settled in my chest. When Ethan announced he wanted to be a content creator, my mom spoke like it was a serious profession, not an impulse. She said he had talent, that he only needed encouragement. Encouragement meant I paid $600 for a creator course he never completed. It meant I ordered lighting equipment and phone mounts for his channel. It meant getting out of bed at 2 in the morning to fix the internet when it crashed during his late-night streams because he was experimenting with setups. While all of that was happening, my own work, the work that actually paid, ran quietly in the background. I turned that small top-floor room into a real office because no one else cared enough to notice what it meant. I used my own savings to buy a proper desk, a chair that didn't destroy my back, a second monitor, a drawing tablet, even decent lighting so I didn't look exhausted on client calls. I covered the walls with wireframes, filled sticky notes with reminders, and built an actual career inside that space. That office was the difference between barely surviving and finally landing better contracts, higher rates, and clients who respected me. But whenever my mom talked about it, she'd say something like, "Emma's lucky she gets to work from home." Lucky. Like it was random. Like I hadn't dragged myself there one deadline at a time. At the same time, she talked about Ethan as if he was one viral moment away from saving us all. She never asked how many hours I spent refining designs or fixing issues no one else wanted to touch. She only noticed when bills were due and somehow, almost magically, they were paid. I kept a private list in my notes app, just for me. Monthly rent I handed over. Utilities I covered when she came up short. Streaming services I forgot were even mine because everyone used them. Groceries. Takeout. Ubers for my mom when she didn't feel like taking the train. Ubers for Ethan when he claimed he had an interview he never actually went to. Every time I updated that list, the number at the bottom got harder to look at. My mom called it family helping family. I started thinking of it as quietly bleeding money so they could pretend nothing was wrong. The worst part was how convinced they were that they had it the hardest. Ethan would complain about how tough it was to make it as a creator while sitting in a room I paid to heat, scrolling through sneakers he wanted. My mom would rant about rising prices while my name sat on half the accounts keeping her life comfortable. I knew, logically, that I had allowed it. I said yes, too often. I stepped in before consequences ever reached them. I softened every edge. And because I always did, they assumed I always would. That was the script. Emma will handle it. Emma will pay. Emma will fix it. I just never thought they'd push me out of the very room that made all of that possible. The night my mom told me to move to the basement, something finally shifted. I stopped making excuses for them and asked the question I'd been avoiding for years: what would actually happen if I didn't fix it this time? That question followed me everywhere. Into the shower. Into my sleep. Into the quiet moments between meetings when my camera was off and my face went neutral. What if I didn't step in this time? That night, I lay on my bed staring at the ceiling, my laptop open, my Figma files untouched. Instead, I opened Zillow. I typed in Queen Studio and set a max price, telling myself I was just browsing. The numbers still made my stomach tighten, but for the first time, they didn't feel impossible. I had savings. Not endless money, but enough. I scrolled past dark, depressing boxes and questionable listings until one stopped me. A small studio in a quiet part of Queens. A big window facing the street. Enough wall space for a desk and shelves. Sunlight on hardwood floors. A tiny kitchen with white cabinets. Nothing fancy, but as I flipped through the photos, I could already picture my monitor, my wireframes taped up, a plant I'd probably forget to water. I checked the price 3 times. $2,200 a month. Expensive, but not out of reach. When I added up my income and subtracted what I'd been quietly pouring into everyone else, I stared at the total in my notes app, the same one tracking everything I'd paid into that house, and realized that in 1 year, I'd already covered the equivalent of several months of that apartment, with nothing to show for it that was actually mine. The next morning, I told my mom I had an early meeting with a client in Queens. It wasn't really a lie. Someone there was about to decide my future. I took the train with my ID and pay stubs in a folder, my heart pounding like I was walking into an interview. The landlord was an older woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense tone. The place was smaller than the photos, but it was clean. Quiet. And most importantly, it could be mine. We sat at the tiny counter while she explained the lease. "You work from home?" she asked. "UX designer," I said. "I just need reliable internet and room for a desk." She nodded. "No parties. No loud music. No drama." I almost laughed. That was exactly what I was trying to escape. When she slid the lease across the counter, my hand shook for a moment. Every fear hit at once. What if work slowed down? What if this was reckless? What if my family hated me? Then one thought cut through everything: they already treated me like I owed them my life, and they still didn't hesitate to push me aside. I signed. I transferred the first month and deposit, $6,600 gone in one click. It stung, but it felt clean. This wasn't disappearing into a pit of excuses. This was building something for myself. On the train back to Brooklyn, I kept touching the new key in my pocket. Proof I had an exit. When I walked through the door, Ethan was yelling into his headset at a game. Last night's takeout containers still sat on the table. My mom stood at the counter, scrolling and complaining about grocery prices. No one asked about my meeting. No one noticed anything different. That made what came next easier. That night, when they asked what we should order for dinner, I said I'd already eaten. The next day, when my mom asked me to add extra items to the grocery order, I told her I couldn't cover more this week. My budget was tight. It was the first no I'd said in years. She paused, then sent a thumbs-up emoji. When the Wi-Fi cut out during one of Ethan's streams, he came upstairs and asked me to reset the router like always. I didn't even look away from my screen. I told him I had a deadline. He could figure it out himself. He stood there, stunned, then walked away. Nothing collapsed. A few nights later, when my mom mentioned needing an Uber for an early shift, I told her I couldn't put it on my account this time. Maybe Ethan could help. Maybe she could take the train. She stared at me like I'd spoken another language. You always help, she said. I'm just being more careful with my money, I replied. It sounded simple, but inside it felt like tearing up an old contract. Each no made the next one easier. Quietly, I started moving my life out of that house. First my external hard drive. Then sketchbooks, favorite pens, clothes that fit into a duffel bag. I told them I was decluttering, using a storage unit, dropping things at a friend's place. None of it was technically a lie. The storage unit just happened to be my new apartment. I started ending my workdays differently. Instead of closing my laptop and leaving it on the desk, I shut it down and slipped it into my backpack. One weekend, I told them my monitor was glitching and I wanted to get it checked, then quietly carried it out of the house. Piece by piece, the office stopped being mine and turned into just another room. They didn't notice. They were too busy talking about Ethan's next content idea and my mom's overtime shifts to see the shelves emptying out. At night, once they were asleep, I made quiet trips to Queens. One box at a time. I learned exactly which steps creaked and how to avoid them. Every time I unlocked the door to that studio and stepped into the silence, it felt like my lungs expanded. I'd set the box down, listen to the echo of my footsteps, and think, this is where I stop being the person who fixes everything first. I hadn't told them yet. I wanted my exit fully built before I said a word. If my mom could decide, over dinner, that I no longer deserved the space that paid their bills, then I could decide quietly that I was done paying them at all. By the time my old office officially became Ethan's studio, with a cheap ring light and sneaker boxes stacked in the corner, almost everything important to me was already gone. They thought they were pushing out a desk. What they were really losing was the last bit of control they had. Everything finally cracked a couple of weeks later. Most of my belongings were already in Queens, but I was still sleeping in my old room, still acting like nothing had changed. One Saturday afternoon, I came back from getting coffee and felt something was off as I passed the doorway of what used to be my office. The door was open. Light poured in. Ethan's voice floated out as he talked to his phone, testing angles. I stepped inside and immediately saw it, the empty space where my chair used to be. In its place was a flimsy folding chair from the basement, wobbling as Ethan adjusted his tripod. My stomach dropped. Where's my chair? I asked, even though I already knew. He didn't even turn around. Mom sold it, he said. We needed the money for my mic. The words landed harder than I expected. I walked straight into the kitchen where my mom was rinsing dishes like it was an ordinary day. Where is my chair? I asked again. She didn't look up right away. Oh, that, she said casually. I put it on Facebook Marketplace. We got $250. Ethan really needed a proper microphone if he's going to take this seriously. We'll find you something else for the basement. That chair was a bit much anyway. I just stared at her. That chair wasn't random furniture. I bought it with my bonus after my team shipped a major feature. I'd spent weeks choosing it after dealing with constant back pain, sitting in showrooms imagining what it would feel like to finally work like a professional instead of hunched over a kitchen table. You sold it, I said. Without asking. She shrugged and finally met my eyes, irritation flickering across her face. Emma, it's just a chair. We share things here. We needed money. Ethan needed equipment. You can sit on anything and work. You're young. You'll be fine. Something in me went completely quiet. For years, I'd explained myself. Justified purchases. Gently reminded them what I contributed. None of it ever stuck. But hearing my mom talk about something I paid for like it was communal property she could cash out for Ethan's latest hobby made something clear. Talking was over. You didn't share it, I said calmly. You sold it. And you didn't need money, you needed mine again. Her jaw tightened. Don't start, Emma. We're all under pressure. Everything is expensive. Ethan is trying to build something. He needs support. There it was again. Support. Always flowing in one direction. I nodded slowly. You're right. Things are expensive. That's why some of us have been paying more than our share for years. Her eyes narrowed. What is that supposed to mean? I walked to the counter, pulled out my phone, and opened the notes app I'd been updating for months. I scrolled and turned the screen toward her. This, I said. Rent. Utilities. Groceries. Subscriptions. Boobers. Ethan's course. His gear. Half the things you don't even remember asking me to cover. I watched her eyes move over the numbers, her lips pressing into a thin line. That can't be right, she said weakly. Those totals are insane. Things were tight, but not like that. I tapped the screen. Screenshots. Statements. Receipts. Every line is there. Ethan wandered into the doorway, controller still in his hand. What's going on? He asked. Is this about the chair? Mom, I told you she'd freak out. She's always dramatic. I turned to him. You think this is dramatic? You sold my chair to buy a microphone for your TikTok videos. And I'm sure when something goes wrong with the order, you'll expect me to help pay for that too. He rolled his eyes. Relax. It's not that deep. We're family. We share. That office was just a room. You act like you built a hospital in there. A sharp, humorless laugh slipped out of me. You're right. It was just a room. A room where I worked the job that's been keeping this house afloat while you play influencer and Mom pretends money appears every month. My mom stepped in, her voice rising. That's enough, Emma. You're being disrespectful. We're all doing our best. Ethan is trying to find his path. You've always been the responsible one. You can handle more. That's just how it is. There it was. The script. You can handle more. Which really meant, you will handle more, because we don't want to. My face went cold. No, I said. That's how it used to be. She frowned. What are you talking about? I slipped my phone into my pocket, suddenly done. I'm talking about the fact that I'm moving out this weekend. The room froze. For a moment, I thought they hadn't heard me. Then my mom laughed, a short, disbelieving sound. Don't be ridiculous, she said. You can't just move out. Where would you go? You know how expensive rent is. You're not thinking straight. Ethan snorted. Sure you are. You're mad about a chair, so you're going to run away and make everything worse. I looked at both of them, feeling calmer than I had in years. You pushed me out of my office without a second thought. You sold my things without asking. You took my money, my time, my energy like it was owed. And you never once asked what would happen if I stopped. I have a place, I continued. I signed a lease. I'm moving my bed and the rest of my stuff on Saturday. My mom's face shifted from disbelief to anger to something close to fear. You can't do this to us, she said quietly. We need you. You help with everything. I know, I replied. That's why I'm leaving. Because as long as I stay, nothing changes. Ethan scoffed. You're just trying to punish us. You'll come back. You always do. Maybe that had been true once. Not anymore. I walked past them, went to my room, and closed the door. I sat on the bed, opened the U-Haul app, and hovered for half a second before selecting the date, the time, the truck size. When the confirmation popped up, terror and relief hit at the same time. Downstairs, I could hear my mom and Ethan arguing in low voices. For once, I didn't try to listen. They made their choice when they picked his ring light over my chair, his studio over my work. I was just finally making mine. Saturday came faster than I expected. All week, my mom acted like my announcement had been a heat-of-the-moment outburst. All week, my mom kept acting like this was temporary. She said things like, once you calm down, we can talk about reorganizing the basement, or, we'll get you another chair later. As if replacing it someday would undo the fact that she sold the one I chose, paid for, and used every day, without even asking. Ethan mostly stayed out of my way, except for a few pointed remarks about how I was about to ruin everyone's life because I got emotional over furniture. I didn't defend myself anymore. I focused on my work, packed what was left, and counted down the hours. Saturday morning, the U-Haul arrived exactly on schedule. The bright orange truck looked almost out of place against the row of old brick houses. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment with the keys in my hand, aware of curtains shifting as neighbors peeked out. My mom opened the door wearing a stiff smile, the kind that said she still believed she could talk me out of this. You actually rented a truck, she said. This is extreme. You don't understand how hard it is out there. I didn't respond. I carried the first box straight past her. The mattress. The dresser drawers. The last of my clothes. The cheap lamp I liked. All the things I'd deliberately left behind so they'd notice when they were gone. The house felt unnaturally quiet, no music blasting from Ethan's speakers, no TV noise. Just footsteps, the scrape of furniture, and the hollow sound of change. At one point, I went into the kitchen, pulled a sheet of printer paper from the drawer, and sat at the table where we'd eaten countless takeout meals I paid for. At the top, I wrote in large letters, what Emma has paid for in the last 12 months. Then I started listing everything. Rent I handed over every month, down to the exact amount. Electric and gas bills I covered when she came up short. The phone plan. Netflix. Hulu. Spotify. All the subscriptions everyone used without thinking. Groceries and delivery orders. Ethan's $600 creator course. Ring lights. Tripods. Essential accessories. Ubers for my mom when she didn't want to take the subway late. Ubers for Ethan when he claimed he had interviews or networking events he never followed through on. Next to each category, I wrote the yearly total. Then I drew a line and added it up. $18,600 and change. I stared at the number. That was nearly a full year of rent at my new place. I grabbed a magnet and stuck the paper to the fridge where it couldn't be ignored. My mom walked in just as I stepped back. What is this? She asked, reaching for it. I moved faster and pressed my palm flat over the page. You can read it, I said. But it stays up. Ethan wandered in behind her, barefoot and half awake, like it was any normal Saturday. His eyes went from the truck outside to the paper. My mom's face drained of color as she scanned the list. This is exaggerated, she muttered. You're making it sound worse than it is. Nobody told you to do all this. I let out a quiet laugh. You didn't have to. Every time you said, I'm short this month, or, can you just put it on your card and I'll pay you back, that was you asking. You just never followed through. Ethan frowned when he saw his name. You didn't have to put my stuff on there, he said. You're trying to embarrass me. No, I replied. I'm trying to be honest. You both keep pretending we're struggling the same way. We're not. I set the pen down and looked at them. This is the last month I ever pay for this house. My mom opened her mouth, clearly ready to snap back, but nothing came out. Ethan just stood there, angry and uneasy. It was the first time I'd seen him feel anything other than entitlement. After loading the final box, I went upstairs one last time to make sure nothing important was left behind. My old room looked strange, empty in a way that felt intentional. The bed frame and a few random items stayed. I wanted the space to look hollow. I wanted it to feel like something was missing. When I carried my pillow down the stairs, my mom was standing by the door, gripping the frame like she needed it to stay upright. "Emma, please," she said softly. "Think about this. We need you. We can't afford for you to just leave." I paused with my hand on the doorknob. "You should have thought about what you could afford before you pushed me out of the room that paid for all of this. I'm not doing this to punish you. I'm doing it because staying here is destroying me." She shook her head, eyes shiny. "You're being dramatic. You'll come back. You always do." "Maybe," I said. "But if I ever do, it won't be as your paycheck." I stepped outside, shut the door, and climbed into the driver's seat of the U-Haul. As I pulled away, I caught sight of them in the side mirror, my mom hugging herself, Ethan glancing between the truck and the paper on the fridge through the kitchen window. For a moment, guilt twisted in my chest like it always did. Then I pictured the sunlight in my new studio, the key in my pocket, and I kept driving. That night, I unpacked until my arms ached, cooked a cheap meal in my tiny kitchen, and sat on the floor surrounded by half-open boxes. My phone buzzed with messages from friends, a bank notification for the U-Haul charge, and nothing from my family. The silence felt strange, but also like proof I was finally standing on my own. I slept on a mattress on the floor, exhausted and lighter than I'd felt in years. The next morning, my phone vibrated so hard it nearly slid off the nightstand. The lock screen was filled with missed calls from my mom and Ethan, notifications stacked on top of each other. For a split second, my old reflex kicked in. Something must be wrong. Someone must be hurt. I opened the messages. "Mom, call me." "Then, you changed the passwords. We can't log into anything. The internet bill is due and it's higher than I thought. Please fix this. We can't afford this without you. Please answer." Ethan's messages were faster and harsher. "The Wi-Fi is out. I can't stream. Did you shut it off on purpose? This isn't funny. Mom is freaking out. We can't pay these bills without you." My phone started ringing again, my mom's name flashing on the screen. It vibrated nonstop, filling the quiet studio. For years, every time that phone lit up with their emergencies, I dropped everything. Meetings. Dates. Sick days. If I didn't answer, things fell apart. I watched it ring until it went to voicemail. Then it rang again. I set the phone face down, took a breath, and made myself a cup of coffee while it buzzed on the table. They treated me like I was optional when they pushed me out of my own office. Less than a day later, they were desperate because they finally felt the cost of that decision. If you've ever wondered what happens when the person holding everything together stops answering the phone, this was only the start. The calls didn't slow after that morning. They came in waves. I let most of them go. The old version of me would have answered instantly, already reworking my budget in my head. The new version saw their names, felt the anxiety spike, and turned the phone face down. I still read the messages though. Curiosity has a way of refusing to die. My mom swung wildly between shame and rage. One moment she accused me of betraying my own family. The next, she was apologizing, saying she was overwhelmed, begging me to call because she didn't know how they were going to survive. Ethan's texts were a different mix, complaints layered with entitlement. He accused me of killing the Wi-Fi, ruining his stream, then followed it up with demands that I at least log in and downgrade the accounts. I finished my coffee, signed into work, and let their chaos stay where it belonged. Life in Queens settled into something quiet and steady. I woke up without noise, made breakfast alone, focused on my UX projects, stepped outside when my head felt tight, cooked simple meals, and went to sleep without anyone asking for my card number close to midnight. The boredom felt luxurious. A few days later, my mom left a voicemail that stopped me in my tracks. Her voice wasn't sharp or defensive. It was small. She said she knew I was upset. She admitted that maybe I was right about how much I had done. Then she told me the gas company was threatening to shut things off. She hadn't realized how many accounts were under my name. They were behind. The weather was getting colder. She didn't know what to do. That familiar pull tightened in my chest, but for once, I didn't respond immediately. I let them sit in the consequences. New York handled it before I did. The temperature dropped fast. A couple nights later, my phone rang again, and something inside me said to answer. I picked up on the third ring. My mom spoke quickly, panic leaking through every word. The heat was out. The furnace had stopped. The repair technician wanted at least $400 just to get it running. Their account was overdrawn. They had nothing. She didn't know what to do. The old version of me would have already been opening my banking app. Instead, I paused. I asked if she had called the gas company to arrange a payment plan. She hesitated. No. She said I always handled those things. Exactly. I stared at the wall and told her I wasn't moving back. She snapped that she wasn't asking me to. Then her voice broke. She said she was asking for help. That they were cold. That something could happen to her. Ethan shouted in the background, saying this wasn't about internet anymore. That the situation was serious. That she was freezing. He asked if I really didn't care. There it was, the guilt trigger they had relied on for years. I heard it clearly. I recognized it. And this time, it didn't hook me the same way. I told them I would help once, but not the way they expected. Silence. My mom asked what that meant. I explained that I wasn't swiping my card and disappearing again. If I stepped in, there would be real boundaries. They could refuse, but if they agreed, they would follow through. Ethan laughed under his breath, calling it ridiculous. Saying heat wasn't a business deal. I ignored him. I laid out the terms. First, I would cover the furnace repair so they wouldn't freeze while we figured things out, but after that, I was off every bill permanently. Second, we would sit down together and go through every dollar coming in and going out, and build a budget that didn't secretly depend on me. Third, Ethan would get an actual job with consistent pay, and at least $300 a month would go toward the house. And fourth, I was no longer 24/7 tech support and emergency funding. Advice was fine if asked. Automatic rescue was over. My mom was quiet for a long time. Then she said it sounded like I was asking them to live without me. I told her I was asking them to live with me as their daughter, not their bank. I reminded her she could say no. But if she did, the heat situation would be hers to solve. More arguing on their end. When she came back, her voice sounded worn down. She agreed. She just asked me to please fix the heat. I contacted the repair company myself, paid the deposit, and scheduled the appointment. Watching the money leave my account still hurt, but this time, it hurt differently. This wasn't another invisible sacrifice. It was a controlled choice. The next evening, I went back to the house for the first time since leaving. The air was warmer, but the atmosphere was colder than the November wind outside. My mom sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by unopened mail. Ethan lingered near the counter with his arms crossed, like he might bolt at any moment. I opened my laptop and pulled up a blank spreadsheet. I said we were starting with income. My mom stiffened, like I'd asked for something invasive, but she answered. Hours worked. Pay rate. Average tips. I typed everything in. Then we listed the bills, mortgage, utilities, phone, internet, minimum payments, subscriptions. Every time we hit something that used to be my responsibility, I marked it clearly. Not anymore. When it was Ethan's turn, he shrugged and said he didn't really have income. He said he was focused on growing his channel. I told him that wasn't income. That was a hobby. I showed him what he was spending and what was coming in. I told him the math didn't care about dreams. If more was going out than coming in, something had to change. I watched it finally register with my mom as she stared at the numbers, something that never happened when I was quietly covering the gaps. She said she could take extra shifts. Maybe weekends. Then she turned to Ethan and told him he could at least get a part-time job. He was on his phone all day anyway. He could sell something. He looked like he wanted to argue, then stopped. I think freezing in his own house did more than any lecture ever could. I emailed them the spreadsheet and closed my laptop. I told them the heat was handled, and the rest was on them. My mom's eyes were glassy. She asked if I was really done. If I was just walking away. I told her I wasn't leaving them. I was leaving the role of being their safety net. I said I'd still come to dinner. I'd answer when I could. But I was never going back to how things were. As I headed out, I glanced at the fridge. The paper listing everything I'd paid for was still there, edges curling slightly. No one had taken it down. They had to see it every time they opened the door. That felt like progress. When I stepped outside and closed the door behind me, the house finally felt like what it truly was, their home, their responsibility, their problem to solve. For the first time, I walked away knowing that if it fell apart, it wouldn't automatically be my job to fix it. 6 months later, my life, and that house, looked nothing like they had the night I was pushed out of my office. My studio in Queens finally felt like mine. I bought a cheap rug, hung prints I designed myself, and placed my desk by the window so I could watch the street while I worked. My days were still busy with deadlines and revisions, but the pressure shifted. Instead of worrying whether my family would implode without me, I stressed about design decisions, the kind of stress I was actually paid for. I landed bigger clients. I started saying no to people who treated me like an ATM. And instead of using every bonus to patch a hole back home, I spent money on things that existed only to make my life better, a better mattress, yoga classes, noise-canceling headphones that belonged only to me. I still saw my family, but now it happened on my terms. The first dinner after the heat situation felt different. The thermostat was set lower than my mom preferred. There were fewer takeout containers. The TV stayed off. She looked tired, but steadier. Halfway through the meal, she slid an envelope across the table without meeting my eyes. Inside was a folded check for $100. She said it wasn't much, but it was the first payment toward what they owed me. My throat tightened. I didn't need the money. What I needed was what it represented, recognition. A few weeks later, there was another envelope. Then another. Not consistent, not perfect, but enough to know it mattered. Ethan didn't transform overnight. His mall job lasted 3 weeks before he realized retail wasn't a fantasy. He ended up at a warehouse across town organizing inventory. At first, he hated it. Then one night he showed up to dinner wearing a work shirt with his name stitched on it and quietly mentioned he'd been promoted to shift lead. I saw pride there that I'd never seen when he was yelling into a camera. One evening, while my mom was in the kitchen, he cleared his throat and told me he sent $50 on Venmo for the course. He said it wasn't everything yet, but he was going to pay me back. I thanked him, and we both understood there was more in that moment than money. He had stopped waiting for miracles and started showing up. The biggest shift was how they treated my time. Midnight panic calls disappeared. If my mom called and I didn't answer, she left a normal message. If Ethan texted asking for my opinion, it was actually just that, an opinion, not a disguised emergency. We still argued sometimes. Old patterns don't vanish overnight. But the boundary was there, and everyone knew it existed. I was their daughter. Their sister. Not their built-in rescue plan. People say revenge is about watching someone else suffer. Sitting in my studio with sunlight on my desk, I realized mine looked different. My revenge was building a life they no longer controlled. By stepping out of the role that kept them dependent, I forced them to grow. My mom learned how to budget without assuming I'd silently cover every gap. My brother learned what it meant to earn his own money instead of spending mine. And I learned that loving your family doesn't mean burning yourself to keep them warm. If any of this feels familiar, if you're the one everyone calls first and thanks last, ask yourself something I avoided for years: what would actually happen if you stopped fixing everything? Not to punish anyone. Not to disappear. But to finally choose yourself. You might be surprised who collapses, who adapts, and who learns, for the first time, how to stand without leaning on you.